Welcome to the Essential Self-Care Podcast, a show for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani, a physician turned speaker, coach, and consultant. As the founder of Radiant Living Institute, I help women, leaders, and executives navigate personal and professional challenges with clarity, confidence, and self-compassion. I also work with leadership teams and organizations to optimize their performance and impact. In this show, you will hear real-world experiences and expert insights to help you cultivate a kinder, more compassionate relationship with yourself so that you can show up as your best self, whether in your career, community, or personal relationships. Please note that this show is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult your own healthcare provider about your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. I am so excited today to be joined by Anna Quinn. I'm going to do a bit of a personal introduction first, and then we'll go into her formal introduction. Anna and I first met through a mutual friend and colleague of ours, Wally Schmader, who is a dynamic executive coach, author, Vistage chair, based here in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where I am based. And since that initial introduction, Anna invited me to speak with 3 of her Vistage leader meetings in North Carolina earlier this year. And so through that process, I've had the pleasure and privilege of getting to know Anna better, learning a little bit more about her personal self-care journey. And that's what we're going to dive into today. Before we go any further, I want to share more of her formal bio as well. Anna Quinn is a leadership development and executive coach with a career spanning healthcare, pharmaceuticals, consumer products, academia, and entrepreneurial ventures. A proud recipient of the Vistage Master Chair and Multi-Year Chair Excellence Award, she leads a variety of Vistage peer advisory boards consisting of CEOs, business owners, senior and advancing leaders. Together with her husband, Chris, she co-founded a business built on the belief that great leadership transforms organizations from the inside out. That's something I can definitely resonate with, as one of my core mottos is that a radiant life and leadership starts from within. So I love that. This is a vision so compelling that their 2 sons, Anna and Chris, their 2 sons, Kevin and Liam, have joined them in carrying it forward. Rooted in the tenacity instilled by her Cuban immigrant parents and forged through personal adversity, she brings an unshakable resolve to everything she does, whether guiding executives through complex challenges or conquering her own, which we'll explore some of that today. She is a black belt in Taekwondo and a marathon finisher. Anna approaches life and leadership with the same high energy, determination, and positive spirit that she brings to every client partnership. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such a privilege to have you on the show. And I guess actually before we go any further, some of our listeners may not be familiar with what Vistage is. You have been a leader in the Vistage community for quite a while now. You and your husband together lead many Vistage groups. I am on the Vistage Speakers Bureau. Would you be able to take just a moment to tell our listeners, to give them some context of what Vistage is?
Yeah, Vistage it's a global firm, and we specialize in peer advisory boards. So my husband and I and countless other chairs across the country and across the globe, we work with business owners and their leadership to try to get them to further build their companies in multiples and whatnot. And it's about bringing different CEOs or different leadership in the room together so that they hold each other accountable, learn about each other's challenges, and support each other. So it's a really, Chris and I have been doing this, Chris for 8 years, me for 5 years. It's really a privilege to work with dynamic leaders in their leadership teams and to work alongside them and just guide them and learn from them too.
Thank you for sharing that and setting a bit of that context. And so for anyone who may be listening who is looking for something like that, who fits that description, an executive, a leader, who may be looking for some executive coaching and peer support, peer advisory support. If you're based in the Raleigh-Durham area, North Carolina, definitely seek out Anna and Chris. If you're in the Hampton Roads area, as I mentioned, Wally Schmader, and we have a second Vistage chair in this area as well. So you can just reach out to me and I can connect you with them. And I'm a Vistage speaker, so I am invited to speak at many Vistage meetings throughout the country, which is how I had the opportunity to get to know Anna better. I also, separate from Vistage, lead some similar sort of groups, but separate from Vistage, related to and specific to women leaders in the region in Hampton Roads. So if anyone's interested in that. But what you're really here to talk about today is your self-care journey and lessons and insights that you've learned along the way, Anna. So can you tell us about a time in your life when self-care became no longer an option, but an absolute priority for you?
Yeah, you're taking me back several decades. So I've always exercised. I've always been on the go. I'm someone who's go, 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 exercise. I loved sports when I was younger. I had an older brother who loved sports, so I kind of tagged along with him. But in my mid 20s, things started kind of getting really interesting. And fast forward 3 years after suffering some severe pain in my legs, it was discovered that I had a very rare circulatory imperfection. And it was discovered that I was the fifth reported case in the last 20 years. And what was interesting is not only was it uncommon, but then I had it in both legs, which made it that much more unique. So it was the process of discovery was 3 years, and then it was major surgeries. I had 3 major surgeries. And I remember one physician telling me, it's a good thing you exercise as much as you do, because if not, you would have been 6 feet under a long time ago. And that's stayed with me. So for me, exercise is just part of my daily routine. Has been since back in the day. I kept it as part of my routine during the surgeries and in between the surgeries, because I figured, hey man, I better keep this up. So it's just something that I've always done.
I'm curious, Anna, you mentioned that it was 3 years from when you first noticed the symptoms, when you started to notice this pain in your legs, from that point until you had a name for it, a diagnosis, and then through that, a path forward in terms of a treatment option, which was those surgeries. I'm certain that there are some folks listening to this show who may be navigating various health challenges themselves, and there's so many who do struggle with a period of, no matter what symptoms they're facing, but a period where there may not be a clear-cut diagnosis right away. And I'm curious, during that time, that 3-year time period, how did you navigate that uncertainty while experiencing something very significant within your body?
So one thing, I was raised in a very strong Catholic upbringing, and the power of prayer it was constant. So my parents were part of prayer groups, so I was constantly surrounded by my parents and their friends, and the power of prayer, and to believe that something's going to become of this, and to keep trying and never to give up and just have faith. There's a purpose for this. And I was very fortunate too that I had access to healthcare and the tenacity and, well, let's try this doctor, and then knowing people and other people recommending. So it was that constant cycle of praying and knowing that something would come of this and just not giving up. So that's a big one that's been instilled in my life, thanks to my parents. That's still strong today.
Thank you for sharing that. So it sounds like, with navigating that uncertainty, that period of uncertainty, prayer and your faith really helped contribute to that resilience and tenacity that you were able to approach this situation with at that time. And I'm also hearing some community support, because you mentioned of leaning on to others who may have had recommendations and suggestions of, hey, maybe checking in with this specialist or scheduling an appointment with this person. And so to me, I'm hearing some community support in there as well.
Yep. It was actually, there was one doctor. My mom was an interior designer, and she was designing the home of one of her clients whose son, unfortunately, was crippled in a football accident from the neck down. He became paralyzed. And so she was seeing a physician for her son. And he was very, very well known, totally different discipline. And she said, well, maybe you could talk to him and maybe he might be able to point you in the right direction, because we were well into year 2.5 with still no. And he said, I'd be happy to see her, have her drop off Anna's medical files in my office. I'll give me 24 hours and, she can come see me. And sure enough, he stuck to his word. And 24 hours later, I'm sitting in his office and he had read my files, touched my legs, and he goes, this is what you have and this is who you need to see. And off I went. And it was that surgeon who ran some more tests, discovered it. And I remember seeing the doctor, his name was Barth Green, down at the University of Miami, probably like 15 years after the fact, maybe 20 years after the fact. I was there. I forget why I went back to University of Miami Medical Center, and I got in the elevator, and who was in the elevator but Dr. Barth Green. And I remember looking at him, and I saw it on his lab coat, and he was getting ready. We got to some floor, and he was getting ready to get out. And I said, wait, before you leave. And he turned around, and I said, you don't remember me, and my name won't mean a thing, but you saved my life 20 years ago. And he went, what? And he just kept walking. I said, and I thank you for that. Wow. And he saved it because he put me in contact with the right doctor.
Yeah. Wow.
So
what a blessing to be able to have had that full circle moment as well, where you had the opportunity to express your appreciation and gratitude there 20 years later. And the other thing that this made me think of is really going back to that, the power of prayer, spirituality, faith, in terms of following these leads and signs. So, you described that you knew someone who was seeing this doctor for their child, unrelated discipline. Mm-hmm. Yet there was this lead, there was this sign, and you just followed it, even though it may have seemed somewhat unrelated or unexpected. It actually just kind of following those inklings and trusting these sort of signs along the way that might not seem to make a whole lot of sense at the time, but then it did. And in essence, as you described, that's what really ended up following those kind of, I'm going to call them like the path of breadcrumbs, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
It's so much more than that, but that's kind of my best way right now in this moment to describe it. That may seem unrelated, but it was leading you on this path to where you were able to find that diagnosis, the name, the specialist who would be able to help you, and the surgeon to help with that treatment. Now, after your surgery, you said you ended up then having surgery in both legs because this impacted both legs. I'm sure that recovery process was also a journey within itself. So what did self-care look like for you during that recovery process? And maybe even some of that continues to this day, I'm not sure, but if you could kind of walk us through that as well.
Yeah, recovery included, continued prayer for safe healing. But it was 6 weeks in bed, actually, after each surgery. And I had 3 total surgeries. So what I did was, since I had that little bug in my ear about it's a good thing you exercise, I was doing calisthenics in bed, or I'd get off the bed and get on the floor and try to do whatever I could to just keep at it and make sure I stayed healthy, because 6 weeks in bed, you can pack it on. And I was on a mission not to pack it on. So maintain, the prayer, the whatever exercise I could do. And I kept myself busy. I made sure I continued to work. I was working at the time. So employer I was working with said, yeah, you can work from home, and I would get files sent to the house. I would work on stuff, make phone calls, and send the files back. So staying occupied as well was another self-care trick, I think.
So it sounds like continuing with the prayer, and it sounds like that's been a steadfast part of your life since childhood and to now as well, and that faith, and as well as the tenacity and resilience. I just keep coming back to those words to continue to stay active. I'm hearing like staying active physically and mentally through continuing to do work to the extent that you could at the time.
Right.
To the extent that you could at the time. Now, I'm curious, since then, you've navigated many other really pivotal seasons of life, including starting a business with your husband, experiencing an empty nest as your kids have grown up and left the home, And now you're also in a season of life where you're starting to think about retirement. And so from that initial sort of pivotal moment where self-care no longer became an option to you prioritizing it and having to prioritize it, you've navigated so many other seasons, and you continue to navigate other seasons, as we all do in our lives. Yeah. And so how has self-care evolved now through some of these more recent seasons of your life?
I continue, if you have to bucket them, what are some tactics or strategies for self-care? Prayer is predominant, right? You maintain that. Gratitude. 6 or 7 years ago, I picked up journaling. Exercise has been a common thread. I don't want to call it diet, but eating patterns has always been, I've pretty much always been a healthy eater. There's always room for improvement, but overall, have maintained that. Because during the different seasons, it sparks or it can trigger anxiety or uncertainty. So you have to lean on something that gives you the strength for that. So prayer that's a daily routine, sometimes multiple times during the day. Gratitude is another one that really helps, because you realize despite the changes and despite the challenges, you grow from these trying times. That's how you grow. And then it's being grateful for everything I'm at a point right now where my husband and I, we're about to celebrate our 33 years of marriage. We have 2 young adult men. One's married, one's preparing his marriage. So, blessing after blessing after blessing. So you can't overlook that. And then stay healthy, because I want to be around them. So I exercise, 6 days of the week. It's part of my normal routine. We're up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We do our exercise and off we go. Because that helps too.
So I am hearing a couple of, you mentioned and you kind of described different sort of buckets of self-care for you. I often talk about it with my clients as creating your blueprint for self-care, because it can look different for every one of us. And so often with my clients who I'm working with individually, we'll work together to create their particular individualized blueprint and really coming up with what are those anchors for them. And it sounds like for you, some of those vital buckets is that spiritual faith, prayer is definitely one of those anchors, one of those tried and true anchors. Another anchor that has come up, I believe you said about 7 years ago, is this focus on gratitude and journaling. Another bucket is which is, I think of kind of that mental, emotional bucket. And then another bucket is that physical health part, which is that exercise, which you said you were very active physically when you were younger as well, throughout life. And then that healthy eating, which also falls into that sort of physical bucket. I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about, because you shared this with me when I was in North Carolina for one of my presentations to one of your groups. You shared with me the gratitude journal that you started doing over, about 7 years ago. And you've described that, yes, to me, that is a place where you jot down all that you're grateful for. And that journal is so much additional as well. Can you just share a little bit more about that? Like what that journaling practice, what that journal looks like for you, what it means to you?
Yeah, it's, I start with writing, and I try to dedicate time every morning on it, or sometimes at night, and I reflect on the day prior. But it first starts with, what am I grateful for? And that goes on and on and on. And there's always repetition in some areas. Another part of it is reflections. Like if I hear of something, if I learn of something, like, when you presented to our groups, there was a lot of insights in those sessions. So I document that in my journal. Another thing is, my husband and I we meet every year and we talk about what do we want to work on for the next year. And we have it categorized by what's financial, what's what's faith-based, what's community or ourselves. And we track ourselves, and to achieve that, what habits do we need to change? So I track, hey, am I doing this? And you measure it, right? Because if it's like, okay, 7 days went by and you didn't do it, you gotta, so I track that too. And just, if I listen to an interesting webinar, that's where I write my notes. So it's a multi-purpose book of, reflections, because you see patterns, or sometimes I'll go back and I'll say, hey, I remember I wrote something down, and where was it? And let's bring it back to the surface. Or if I do something, if I meet with someone that day, they go into my, like today, you'll be in my gratitude journal, right? Because you and I met. And it just really, it makes you, it's a different mindset, and you, that's where you appreciate, look at everything that I have, look at everything that I've been blessed with. So try to focus on that. So it's an everything journal, and I've been doing it for 7 years. So I take it with me places. Sometimes I show it to people, and sometimes I don't. Doesn't.
I really appreciate you sharing that process with us as well, because I think for many of us, it can be easy to hear these different tools and strategies like, oh, gratitude. Okay, I should practice gratitude. Or, oh, journaling. I should start journaling. But to have these tangible examples of how others have actually engage with those practices, and to know that there's not one single way, you can really make it your own. And that's what I love hearing about you describe this process for you, and how this is really your, as you described, your everything journal. And there's so many different things that you include in there, including things that you feel grateful for, things that you appreciate, reflections, insights, accountability for yourself as well. People that you've met. And so I think just, for our listeners, you can, if any one of those aspects resonate with you, that could be a great place to start. Now, as we're starting to wrap up the episode, Anna, I'm curious because, you've been prioritizing your self-care since your 20s. We've talked about lots of different tools that you've used over the years and continue to use. And yet when I came to speak with your groups, I did the same presentation. It was on mastering leadership through emotional and nervous system regulation. I did the same presentation with 3 of your groups in 3 consecutive months. And so obviously you were present for each one of those. And I saw you were jotting down notes, you were taking notes during each one as well. Despite this emphasis that you've already had throughout much of your life on this. And so I'm curious if you could share with our listeners, what were some of the big takeaways that you had from that content? And what are perhaps some of the tools or strategies that you have started to implement and use since then?
Yeah, well, you really shaped some of the stuff that I'm doing right now that I've added. I mean, your breathing exercises, the framework that you shared and that you walked all of us through. You didn't just describe them, you had all of us do it. So I practice the breathing exercises regularly. The other one is your NPR, your name, pause, and reflect framework. I do that, especially when you get triggered or when there's a slight rise in anxiety or something. I'll stop and I'll go back to as if you were talking in the room again. And then the other one that really helped a lot was your CAR method. So, getting the clarity, the acceptance, and then the rebuilding framework. So it really shaped me when I heard it the first time, because one of the things that I never did when I was younger was meditate. That to me was a foreign object for me. And people say, you have to meditate. And I go, well, what's that? How do you do that? Because I was always go, 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 always on the fast move. So for me to stop and pause and meditate was just too foreign for me. And I think when you presented it, it's like, oh, okay. And now I practice it regularly.
I remember that was a big insight for you, because you had said that you always kind of shied away from meditation, kind of like, this isn't for me. And then the definition that I use for meditation had really resonated with you and the experience of it. And so I've taken, my background is in Eastern wisdom, yoga, mindfulness meditation, Ayurveda, the ancient medical system of India, and then obviously Western medicine. And so I've brought together this ancient Eastern wisdom with what I've seen in terms of descriptions of meditation in the scientific literature as well. And I've brought that together into my own definition of meditation as a practice of focus and concentration. And that's all it is. It's a practice, and you're practicing, focusing, and concentrating on something. And that really, really resonated with you. Now that you're mentioning it, I'm remembering that was such a big insight for you. And then some of the others that you mentioned, the NPR, which is name what you're feeling. So this is when you're finding that sort of stress response being triggered in any way. Name what you're feeling. Pause. So take a break, step away if you need to. Actually, we were chatting earlier, Anna, you were working on something where you had to use this exact strategy and pause. And then once you've had a time for that stress response to kind of pass, you could say, then taking that time to reflect. And it's interesting, Anna, episode 103, I believe it was, I had another executive coach on, Tony Collis, and she had her own NPR method, which was similar, but hers was notice, pause, reframe. But it was interesting because we were both laughing that we both had this like same, NPR for that. Well, thank you so much for sharing and for joining us today. For anyone who wants to learn more about you, Anna, about the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is the easiest place. So they can just find me on Anna Quinn, and it's Anna with one N.
Thank you. I'll include that as well as your website in the show notes below. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Very grateful.
That's a wrap. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and write a quick positive review wherever you're tuning in, on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Your reviews really do help the show reach more people who need it. And as a free gift, don't forget to download your Radiant Living Starter Guide at radiantlivinginstitute.com.